Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Owning Your Grit panel. As Washington University's hub of innovation and entrepreneurship, the Skandalair Center is committed to providing a collaborative and welcoming event experience. To ensure this, we ask that you actively and respectively engage everyone participating. Since we're in this virtual environment, we do ask that to facilitate networking and connections, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and share your LinkedIn profile if you wish. It's just an opportunity for us to engage in different ways outside of this Zoom environment. We are so excited to have you join us for the first of our series of summer events. Today's panel focused on overcoming challenges as an entrepreneur. Jennifer Bardot convened 40 women to share their stories of owning their grit. We are joined today by Jennifer and 3 of her co-authors. Nancy Nye, our communications and events manager, will moderate this panel. Nancy, will you please introduce these gritty panelists?
Thank you, Jessica. I would love to. Welcome, everyone. Joining us today, we have Jennifer Bardot, the author of the book, Owning Your Grit, and Vice President, Senior Business Banker for Enterprise Bank and Trust. Jennifer has over 20 years of experience working in small businesses in the St. Louis community in the areas of customer service, sales, marketing, finance, business development, and recruiting. Jennifer earned a bachelor's in business administration and has 2 master's degrees in secondary education counseling and private practice therapy. Jennifer was named one of the top 100 people in St. Louis to know to grow your business by Small Business Monthly and was awarded President's Circle by Enterprise Bank and Trust. She is deeply involved in the St. Louis community through volunteering and mentoring with many groups. So welcome, Jennifer. We're so glad to have you. And next, I'd like to introduce co-author Shar C Smith. Shar specializes in coaching working moms to overcome self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Shar is the founder of Empower You Consulting, a leadership development firm that maximizes potential and accelerates career growth for new leaders, emerging leaders, and women. In addition to being an entrepreneur, Shar has over 15 years of leadership experience, has led teams at various Fortune 500 companies and nonprofit organizations. She obtained her Master of Education in Adult and Higher Education from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and has a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Welcome, Shar. We also have with us today co-author Kate Redfearn. Kate is a South African-born American with 20 plus years experience as a nonprofit board member, volunteer, development director, and executive management team member in South Africa, Botswana, the Cayman Islands, and the United States. She is a social impact strategist and founded Andisonia Consulting in 2014 to provide consulting services to nonprofits and community-oriented business leaders to maximize their social impact through effective community-focused organizational development. Kate volunteers and serves on several boards of directors and is a Reiki practitioner committed to making the world a better place by facilitating connection through love, compassion, and kindness. We're so glad to have you with us, Kate. And lastly, I'd like to introduce co-author Trish Jensen. Trish is the owner of Millicare by M.R. Jensen Enterprises and Millicare by Optimum Floor Care. These are franchises that focus on cleaning, disinfecting, and maintaining all types of flooring and textiles for commercial spaces. Trish and her husband Mitchell founded M.R. Jensen Enterprises in St. Louis in 1997 and expanded into the Chicago area with Optimum Floor Care in 2019. Trish and Mitchell moved to St. Louis to start their first business with nothing but their baby girl and a dream to build their own business. Trish graduated from Brigham Young University with a bachelor's degree in English in 1997. Welcome, Trish. So we have an amazing panel here today, but before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that we will be raffling off a few copies of the Owning Your Grit book after this event. So stay tuned to the end and we will let you know how to enter the raffle. And I'd just like to start by asking Jennifer, how did this book come about?
Good question, and thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So this had kind of been on my to-do list for several years, and initially I thought I was going to just talk about my grit stories that I've endured, and I thought, no, I don't want this just to be about me. I want this to really resonate with women of all ages, ethnicities, and different walks of life. So I expanded it and I called one of my friends that I knew I could be held accountable with. And I gave her this idea about, talking through stories. And, that's generally how our culture learns things, is through storytelling. So the idea came to me, and then I just took a running leap of faith, and here we are. And I'm so honored, and I feel entrusted that 40 women stuck beside me to see through this vision and create this masterpiece of what it came out to become. So that's kind of where the idea came from.
Wonderful. And so let's start with each of you giving a quick 3-minute background on what drew you to this project. Why don't we start with you, Jennifer?
So this project really resonated with me because this is just the tip of the iceberg in regards to my resiliency and my grit that I've had to endure to get to where I am. But in 1,500 words, I took this story that really resonated with me the most. And my story was, when I was 9 years old, I was, diagnosed with an IEP, and the resource teacher told my mom and me while sitting in this room that I would never graduate from high school. So, in my story, I really talk about how, there was a time when I believed what she said, and I created that mindset and was going down that track of not graduating from high school. And then I really started to believe in myself and see the power that I had within myself to push through and to do the work and to, create the life that I wanted for myself. So I have 2 master's degrees. Obviously, I completed high school and I have an undergraduate, but I was the first in the family to ever graduate from college. And I think the second to ever graduate from high school. So generally, my family is entrepreneurs. So they, that focus and that structure of school isn't really one that fits for us. But I found a way to kind of not be that system reject, is how I put it. So that's my story. And that's one of my grit journeys that kind of cultivated who I am and really encouraged me to pull together these women. So
wonderful. Shar, give us a 3-minute story about what drew you to this project.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me a part of your panel today. For one, Jennifer came to me with this idea, and I just resonated so much. Grit, if you all don't know, stands for growth, resilience, intention, and tenacity. And so all of those 4 words resonate with me, but I had to be strategic and really pick one that I wanted to discuss. And so for me, I chose intentionality. And the story that I shared, it was about my journey of leaving Kansas City, Missouri, where I'm born and raised, to relocate to St. Louis, Missouri, where I had no family, no friends, no one, but I wanted to pursue a master's degree. So I use that as my reason to move here. And my story, it really does just go in depth about how I was able to be intentional with the career choices, with my relationship, how I met my husband, how we decided to get married, and really expand our lives being here in St. Louis. And so my story it's lighthearted, and I really hope that it resonates with those out there who have a plan and want to be intentional about executing it.
Wonderful. Kate, would you mind going next?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for having me here today. My journey to being part of this book was similar to Shar's. I was asked by Jennifer if I'd like to participate, and she kind of told me everyone who was involved, and it was very overwhelming, and I felt very underqualified to be a part of this incredible group of women. But I kind of said yes anyway, and I think, as Jennifer has shown over and over again, her 100 People to Know title is very definitely earned and valid. She's somebody who builds other people up and pulls them along with her as she celebrates her success. And so I said yes, and I didn't know what I was going to write about. I was really, really nervous about it. And had an idea of the story that I was going to write. And I say this all the time when people say, what did you choose to write about? Was I didn't know the story that was going to come out of me is the one that would come out, but it was obviously the story that wanted to be told. And I was really nervous about it, but I sent it off anyway. And when I got to reading everybody else's stories and hearing their stories as we were talking about them before the publication date, I really just was astounded at how honest and authentic and vulnerable all of these women are about what their life experience has been like. And I think the thing that I took away from it is that we've all had that moment where we figure out, where we feel like kind of alone and unsupported, and where do I go from here to make my life what I want it to be? And I think each story is some version of that. Mine specifically speaks about how my dog literally saved my life after my father had died, and I felt like I was completely lacking in any kind of purpose or direction, or just any kind of will to even want to try and feel better, because I felt like I didn't matter now that my dad was gone. And my dog showed me different, and I went through the long dark night, and when I got to the other side of it, it really forced me to think about, like, if I have this life that I want to live, what does that look like for me? And what do I want to spend my time doing? And who do I want to spend my time with to make it purposeful, rather than waiting for purpose to be bestowed upon me? Where do I seek the purpose and find the purpose and pursue that for myself? And that doesn't always have to be altruistic in intent. It was really about me and what I wanted and what I needed to feel successful and worthy and validated, and like this was a full life that I was participating in. And so that was the story that came out of me within the framework of some animal shelter work that I do, that I really enjoy. And I have very much enjoyed getting to know these women and who they are and what their stories are, and appreciated the authenticity that they bring to the journey that they've taken to their success, in the hope that it can inspire other women and men to understand that looking like you have it together all the time isn't necessarily the indicator of success. So thank you.
I love that. And last but not least, Trish.
So I was drawn to this book. I had met Jennifer right before the pandemic, and just being a business owner, we connected, her working with business owners, and through the pandemic, she really helped me, not only as a resource, but became a friend with my business, trying to get the PPP, and during just a crazy time. And I really wrote about what got me through that pandemic. It was training and some leadership things that I had done before the pandemic started. So when the pandemic came, I had these characteristics developed, and so I was able to kind of persevere through the unknown, the craziness of being a business owner during this time, where I thought we'd be okay since we were in the public space and were essential. And in the end, it didn't really matter whether it was essential or not. The buildings closed down and everything shuts down. So just writing about that strength of character, the courage to kind of persevere through everything, and then being able to come out the other side. And then when she told me the name of it was Grit, I was like, okay, I have to do it. One of my sister Shield Maiden, you have to read the book, my chapter, she would always tell me how much grit I have. And so it just seemed kind of like, oh, I need to do this. So
that was kind of the first sign, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a few questions of our panelists. Anyone attending today, if you'd like to add questions to our list, please put them in the chat now, and we will try to get to them. I have a few questions that came from when people RSVP'd, and the first one is, how has owning your grit manifested in your life, or how have you owned your grit? Give us some real life examples. Anyone can go first, or who would anyone like to start?
I'll jump in. So this is one of the stories that I talk about when I was 9 and I had to really figure out who I was and what I wanted my future to look like. But, you know, there's been a lot of challenging times in my life. If it was, you know, dealing with heartbreak, loss, even health issues that I've had in my past. There was a year, I have 3 boys. I had just had my second son, and I was working for a small family business, my family business, 2 weeks after having my second son, and I was told that I couldn't go back to work. So I obviously had not prepared for that. And at that time, my husband had already lost his job. So there was 2 of us unemployed with a brand new 2-week-old and a 3-year-old prior to that. So I had to really harness my grit and get motivated and see myself figuring that situation out to get us through that time. You know, if you have to be intentional, but you also have to be really tenacious, because if you don't have your fire lit and you don't see the intention of where your direction is heading, you're never going to hit your goal. So you just got to keep those feet moving and see the light at the end of the tunnel. So that's a story that's not in the book, but that's another journey that I've had to experience. And it definitely took some grit to get through that time. Obviously, we came through and we have 3 kids and we both have full-time jobs and continue to get successful. But there was a lot of failure along the way. And we call it the year of pancake because there was a lot of struggling, and we pushed through together, and it was just a challenging time. But it took grit and resiliency and tenacity to push through to, you know, get to that next job and be able to still have a roof and take care of the family.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Trish, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. For me, how I've owned my grit is I would probably, and I talk about this in my chapter, but it's really showing, having clarity on what I want and clarity on where I'm going. And even though I had no control over what the situation was, no one really did. I just kept pushing forward, having the light at the end of the tunnel, knowing someday this is going to pay off. And it's interesting because as I've seen other of our franchises throughout the nation, we have, you know, I only own 2 of them, but a lot of them have just struggled. They've just been like, oh, things are shut down. There's nothing I can do. And every time I talk to our corporate guy, he's like, well, Trish is doing it. Trish is doing it. She just keeps on. If I can't go one direction, I'm going another. And, you know, we didn't do disinfections before. It's like, we're doing disinfection now, you know, so just trying to pivot and just not giving up and just keep grinding and grinding. And I mean, now it's out of control. Everything's opening and we're just like, stop. So I think just knowing just being clear on what you want and having that commitment is going to get you where you need to go.
And what a great example of pivoting in the moment and taking advantage of the situation. I love that. Did anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, Nancy, I can contribute to that. I think that the lessons that I've learned through, I don't think anybody's life is without hardship. So we all find ourselves in these moments where we're like, I didn't see this curveball coming. This is not what I had planned. And what do I do next? And so after you have like the little pity party and you get back up on your feet, the one thing I've learned is that I may not be where I want to be yet, but that doesn't mean that I can't take a step to get there. And part of resiliency for me and intentionality and really kind of understanding what the journey is that it's a journey. It's not like you're at the beginning and then you're at the destination and everything in between doesn't count. It's not this like time travel leap that happens. And so all you've got to know and take confidence in is the next step that you're going to take. And you may know what the outcome is that you want, but you don't have to know exactly what that looks like or how you're going to get there. And when I stopped being absolutely rigid in what I perceived as being the sequence of steps that I needed to get there and the opportunities that I needed to chase, it opened me up to being able to say yes and see other opportunities that I wouldn't have normally looked at or seen as being something that were going to help me get to where I want to be. And so kind of letting go the need to know everything and control everything, which is all just an illusion anyway, and kind of being comfortable with, I don't know what comes next, but I know that right now I can do this, which is going to help me get there, has something that has alleviated a lot of stress and anxiety for me. I tend naturally towards that position. And so I think when I look back at all of the hardships that I've grown from and kind of the obstacles and challenges that I've faced that I've grown from, all of them have been in ways that I never would have expected. And outcomes have been have been achieved not in the way that I thought they would. And so if I can kind of remove my arrogance in believing that I know best about everything all the time, and really just focus on, this is the thing that I can do today with the resources that I have to get me to the next point, rather than being all or nothing, has been really helpful. And I think, like Trish was saying, this last year was another lesson in that. I work in the nonprofit sector. I consult mostly to nonprofits. The first thing nonprofits did in April when everything shut down was basically freeze everything. They froze internal, they furloughed employees, and they certainly froze any kind of consulting work. And so I lost about 80% of my income in the space of 3 weeks. It just crashed, and I had no idea what I was going to do. Jennifer was a big part of helping me get through that. But I think, again, it was like waking up every day and like, what can I do today? So I spent a lot of time volunteering with nonprofits that needed volunteer help, just so that I was staying up to date and still networking and still being active in the community that I wanted to work in, trusting that everything had to be okay, because the one thing I've learned is that I am very resourceful, and I find a way to make it okay, even if it's not the way that I want. But yeah, just kind of releasing the need to control everything and believing that I need to know the way that everything is going to go before it happens has been one of my greatest lessons in terms of grit, because it's scary to not know what's coming, but it also opens up opportunities that you wouldn't explore otherwise.
And I think that's a great message for our students that are on the call today. They often think they need to have their life after graduation completely figured out. And the reality is none of us have our lives completely figured out.
Oh no, I've had my life figured out in so many different iterations in so many different ways over the last 25 years since I've left college. 20 years ago, I would not have said I'd be sitting in St. Louis, Missouri as an American citizen. Like, that was not on my radar at all, yet here I am. So yeah, certainly, like, not even the next 5 years. Do that if it makes you feel good, but understand that it's probably not going to be what happens.
Shar, did you want to jump in here, or do you want to tackle the next question?
I'll jump in really quickly just to share that you made me giggle when you said we think we have it all figured out, because, last year taught us that none of us really truly do. But I say all that to say that last year, it really did allow me to own my grit. My husband, he was let go of his job. He was the breadwinner. We had just purchased a new home. We had just enrolled our kids in a new school that was going to be a lot more expensive. And so it really forced me personally to get focused, to set goals, and just to have that clarity around where I wanted to go so that I could continue to push through and own that grit to get there, despite what the world what was going on in the world. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
And if I could just jump in, I think that's actually why I took the lead with making this book happen, because of the timing, because I've been in my role as a banker, I get to hear a lot of these stories, and it's such a privilege. And the timing was really important because so many people were going through such hardships, a loss of a life, a loss of a job, so many different things transitioning, struggling with, homeschooling their kids, or you're a business owner and the decrease in unexpected income. So the timing was really important, because I really wanted this to reach our audience and help them see that, hey, one of these stories might resonate with you, and this is going to leave you feeling inspired and hopeful, maybe give you that light at the end of the tunnel to keep you fighting for the next day and stay empowered.
I love that. So what is one of the biggest challenges that you've faced as an entrepreneur? Anybody want to jump in? Trish.
I'll go ahead. One of our biggest challenges for my business is finding enough workers, especially right now, and just finding people that want to fill that space, that have not just the capability, but they want it. So that's probably our biggest thing. And then being able to, being a business owner, I'm in charge. It wasn't just my life that was affected, but all my employees and their families. And it's just a huge responsibility that you have when you're really trying to, take care of your employees and their families. And that's probably my biggest challenge.
Anyone else want to share one of their biggest challenges as an entrepreneur? Kate.
Yeah, I can say that. I think for me, when I first started with consulting, I had some struggles around when to go from being a single person consultancy, which is basically just me selling myself, to having now got enough work that I need to hire other people and trusting somebody else. I've worked as a manager at an executive level as an employee, where I've had no problem with delegating and figuring out what people need to do. But when I feel like this is absolutely a direct reflection of me and my professional reputation, trying to figure out who and how to delegate tasks and things to do to somebody else was one of my biggest challenges. Then that goes along with learning to say no to opportunities, because not every opportunity is the right one for me. But when you're just starting out and you're hungry, you're willing to feed yourself with anything. And so I think also learning to become discerning and figuring out which is the good match for me so that I can do a good job for me and my client. Those were the two biggest I think mental and emotional obstacles that I had to overcome to be effective at doing my job.
And was that kind of trial and error for you? I mean, I feel like now you've figured it out.
Yeah. I think on the second part, I went through a kind of how do I position myself? Who do I want to be working with? What are the things that I want to be doing? And I eliminated quite a lot of my clients when I went through that stage. Some of them kind of self-selected out, and then I managed them out. Part of it was also like, when you're hungry, you'll work for anything, right? And I learned that with my pricing strategy. And I actually worked with a SCORE mentor who helped me tremendously with figuring out what my pricing strategy should be. When I priced myself higher, people respected my time more than when I came in lower. And so that was a big part of it for me. And so learning which opportunities resonate in terms of what my strengths are, what they're looking for, and where our values align was really important. And then finding people to do the work. It was so hard to find people to trust, not because they weren't trustworthy, but because it was difficult for me to let go. And I went through a couple of people who I micromanaged out of existence, and I fully own and admit that, and learned how to not do that, to now working with two women that I absolutely trust to do the job, come to me when they need something. We check in once a week. And I have learned that they know how to do the job. And again, to like kind of let go of the arrogance that I'm the only one who knows exactly how this should be done for my clients in the way that they need it to be done. It's not proprietary information. And so kind of just letting go of that sense of self-importance has been helpful with that too.
Thank you. What about you, Shar? What's the biggest challenge you've faced as an entrepreneur?
I guess going back to the pandemic year, it was just spending a lot of time preparing proposals and pitching, and realizing that ultimately the people they don't have the funding at this time to move forward with my consulting. So that was challenging. But I do know that for every person I talk to, it's going to be a warm lead for the next year, So I don't look at it like a negative, but it's a lot of time, a lot of time you spend preparing for presentations and things, only to say, oh, we don't have the budget or the funding because of the pandemic, and we've had to let people go, and things are shifting with our business, so we can't bring you in, sort of like what Kate was saying, in her nonprofit space. So that's been the hardest thing for me.
Yeah. So one question from one of our attendees: I would love to start my business, but I don't have capital or connections to move forward. Help. So maybe Jennifer, you can start us off on this one.
Yeah, I think you need to call me. So that's actually where I bring the most value. So I love helping startups. I volunteer with I-10 and SLU's mentorship program. So funding is not always the issue. We can always look at that at enterprise, but I always try to think through connections that are revenue generating based on the service that you're providing. So I'd love to just have a conversation and see if there's anybody within my network that would be, valuable to have have a conversation with. But in our St. Louis community, there's so many resources out there. If it's a grant or an accelerator or, just, private investors too. So never think that there isn't any options. If you have an idea and you have the drive, there's always a way. So I'd love to have a conversation.
Go ahead, Shar.
A suggestion that I have is to connect with Venture Cafe. There are tons of resources there, and I just received an email today of different funding opportunities for startups. So yeah, if you could get plugged into that type of community, a startup community, an entrepreneurship community, there are different co-working spaces where you can meet other entrepreneurs who also have resources and networks that you could connect with. That's the way to go.
I love that. And just by chance, the Scandalaris Center is having an event next Wednesday called Making Capital Friendly. And the whole topic of that event is going to be talking about different types of capital and what might be right for you, because not every type is right for every startup. So everyone is invited to join us for that, and we will put a link to that in the chat. Did anyone else want to comment on finding capital and making connections?
Yeah, I have a comment for everything. I think that I would really encourage anyone who's thinking about starting a business to seek out a formal mentoring relationship. There are so many of those organizations in St. Louis. I know that I have worked with SCORE St. Louis. There's IMT at SLU. I know Scandalaris has efforts. Venture Cafe is another one. You'll find the one that works for you. I felt daunted because I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew that I knew the business of nonprofit, but I wasn't really sure about what the business of running my own business looked like or how to do that effectively. And rather than trying to reinvent the wheel or figure it out, I had two mentoring relationships. Both were really fruitful and helpful in terms of helping me ask myself the right questions. So they're not going to tell you how to do it or when to do it or where, but your mentors will ask you the right questions that you need to be thinking about to prepare to make that leap. And very often they have connections too that they can introduce you to. I know I've been a client of Jennifer's now for just under a year. And what she said is absolutely true. If you're invited to go and talk to Jennifer, absolutely do it. She's a super networker, and there are a lot of those people in St. Louis. It's just overcoming maybe the reticence to put yourself out there as somebody who is actively looking to connect. That can feel really daunting, but there are so many people that are willing to connect you with other people and make connections with you. That is helpful and bring you into this community. I've heard a lot about how St. Louis is a really cliquey community. I'm not from here originally, but I find that with a little bit of effort and putting yourself out there and saying, I'm here, I want to connect, has been really helpful. There are a lot of people who want to get to know you too. And as long as those relationships are authentic, and it's really about getting to know people in the landscape and understand what is going on and participate in it actively instead of just coming at it from the perspective of what can this do for me and what can I take from this, but really about participating fully and wholly within that community. I think that you would be really well received. And as I said before, you would see opportunities that maybe you hadn't anticipated that you're able to seize. So definitely look for a community rather than trying to do it on your own.
That is great advice. I apologize for my dogs barking everywhere. We did have a question come on that was specifically for Shar and Jennifer. What is your favorite thing about business administration?
You want to go first, Shar?
Oh yeah, sure. I didn't know. I was like, okay, should I wait? So I am a numbers person. So this question is kind of twofold for me. So my top two things about business administration. First, it's human resources. I absolutely love people development and the people leadership side of business. But in addition to that, I'm a numbers person. So I love the data. I understand that in order to make a sale, you may have to contact 50 people first. So I'm really data driven. So that's the behind the scenes business part. So I'm constantly monitoring, seeing how many contacts I should make, things like that in order to move my business along. So that's all I have for you on that one.
And I would say mine's very similar. I don't know if you heard my intro, but I have 2 masters in counseling and secondary education. So I love helping and I love people. So the privilege of hearing these stories and their vision and their passion and their dreams is really, it's interesting to me. I love hearing about these new businesses and these new ideas, which is why I gravitate towards startups and those interesting communities. But Yeah, for me, it's always the people, and having the privilege to hear the stories is what drives me into business administration. I've always found it fascinating. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. And does anyone else want to tackle that one? Kate or Trish? No, that's okay if you don't. We have more questions. Here's a question for all of our panelists. When taking breaks to prevent burnout, or even at the point of burnout, how do you distinguish between self-care and coddling? So maybe taking self-care too far, or avoiding taking your self-care too far. Go ahead, Shar.
Okay. I personally believe that you cannot have enough self-care. So coddling has never been something that I thought of in that space. But for me to prevent burnout is I actually schedule in breaks for myself for self-care. So I call it my celebration day. And once a month, I take a day and it's all about me, and it's no work and it's no kids. It's just all about me. That way I can get refocused and rejuvenated so that I can keep my same intensity and my same resiliency when I do push forward to continue with my business again. So it can be overwhelming when you're trying to build, especially a startup, because you don't really have a blueprint. So you are doing everything. But one thing to remember is that once you have everything in place and you have your systems in place, you don't have to recreate them again. So it does take a whole lot of hard work and effort up front. And it is going to be challenging and it is going to be overwhelming, but you have to remember to focus on self-care and not let yourself get to that place of burnout. So that's my approach for self-care. I hope everybody can take a day to celebrate themselves for all the hard work and accomplishments. Make sure you're setting smart goals, so that way you actually can see tangible results for what you have accomplished in order to know what you're celebrating on your monthly celebration days.
I love that idea, and I'm going to start incorporating that into my life. Does anyone else want to share how they go about self-care?
I think it's Trish. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I agree with Shar. Like, I don't do that, but I'm going to start doing that. It's just been hard being a business owner. I mean, yeah, we've been doing it for 24 years. And in the beginning, there was a ton of work and you were just working around the clock. And then the middle portion, it seemed to get to a point where things were going great. You didn't work as much. And then it's almost like we flip-flopped again just because of what happened this last couple of years. Right before the pandemic, we actually lost about $250,000 in contracts. And then so 2020, we were going really strong and really optimistic, and then the pandemic. So that was crazy. And so now I found myself just working my butt off again. But we've actually, I think the other thing is along with the self-care is, like Shar said, putting those processes in place. And so, yes, after 24 years, we're finally getting processes that are going to keep me out of the business eventually more from the day-to-day and the things I don't want to do, so I can just focus on what I do want to do. So it's still a work in progress for me.
Work in progress, yeah. And another question, when facing tough challenges, is your motivation coming from external or internal factors?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's a bit of both. I think there's the external factor of I'm who I have to rely on. So I've got to make it happen because nobody else is going to come and do it for me. But also, I think one thing that I think is a trait that I see among most business owners is failure is not an option, right? And so it's kind of an internal drive to succeed, to not fail, be perceived as a failure, feel like you couldn't do something, so you'll do whatever it takes to make it work. I think that those are both pretty prevalent traits for entrepreneurs. And I think a lot, like Shar said, I don't see anybody in the space that I feel is coddling themselves in terms of self-care. In fact, I don't think people are doing it enough. And so I love that idea of celebrating your goals, knowing what it is that you're celebrating every month, which I think could be an internal. I think we're mostly motivated by, I say we, assuming I speak for everyone. I know that I'm motivated by knowing that I've done the best job that I can do, and that I'm going to deliver on what I said I would deliver. And I typically kind of over deliver, and I'm trying to pull back on that. But I think most of it is an internal motivation, because I know that the work that I do is a reflection of myself as an individual. And that's what's going to carry me forward to my next contract. But I think that there is an external element as well, in terms of have to get this done because I need to get the bills paid. And also I think with my clients, I have to get this done because they're relying on me to get it done. And if I don't succeed at this, or I don't get this done, then I let down a whole group of people who are going to let down the clients that they serve. So I think it's a mixture of both.
Jennifer, did you want to add to that, or
Yep.
give you?
Well, I think her and I are very much in alignment. It's very much internal, just being self-reliant and self-focused, but making sure that you're doing the best. That's kind of how you always should show up, at least in my perspective. Always doing your best and making sure that, you do follow through on your promises. So in failure, that phrase is something that I've always used. Failure is never an option. And I feel like having true grit, you have to really internally believe that. And it's a mindset. So I really think it is, for me, very much in alignment with whatever was already stated. So,
Thank you. We have a question from one of our attendees, Jim. Other than grit, what are the 2 to 3 most important character traits to be a great entrepreneur? And maybe Shar, since you said you love your side gigs, maybe you could start us off on that one.
Yeah, well, the definition of grit, as we put it, is growth, resilience, intention, and tenacity. And honestly, the words that I live by are defined right there. You have to be resilient. You have to understand that you are going to face challenges in business. It just is what it is. But how do you bounce back from those challenges? How do you recover from COVID, the year we just had? So that's very, very important. It's also important to have self-leadership. There's no one over you managing you, telling you what you need to do day to day when you're a business owner. You have to have integrity. When you have clients who are depending on you to meet their deadlines and to get things done for them, you have to do that. There's no one, again, over you managing you. So those are the qualities that I hold true. Integrity it's a lot. You want to be a trustworthy person. You want to be honest. I mean, people are paying you. They want transparency to know, can you really deliver on what it is that you're saying that you're going to deliver? So these are all things that I personally live by. Leadership. You have to know how to lead yourself. I keep going back to leadership because ultimately leadership defines so many other great characteristics that a person needs to have in order to be a great business owner and to be successful in business.
Wonderful. Thank you. Trish, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think besides grit, you need to be really clear on what you want. So you need to be clear in the direction you want to go. I have a coach and he says clarity is power. And so if you're clear, it's going to empower you to be able to do what you need to do to get the job done, which then goes right into commitment. He'd always say commitment alters everything. And so being truly committed on what you want, what you're trying to accomplish. And then the final thing he would always say is you do what it takes to get the job done in spite of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and moods. So because you don't feel like it, it doesn't matter. If you're wanting to be successful in your business and you want to grow and do what it takes, or even just in your career, whatever, or in your family, or just with anything you want in your life, you kind of have to, I think, be very clear and be committed.
I love that. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to add, for me, I'm fueled by passion. So like if I'm not authentically in the game, then there isn't going to be the results that I want to see, as the outcome. So for me, the words that resonate are passion and then reflection, because I feel like as a business owner, there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of wins, but you need to reflect and see what's worked and what hasn't worked. So for me, those two words would be passion, and make sure that you actually are living out your truth, and then you're still feeling motivated and getting the outcome you wanted, but also acknowledging through reflection your wins and your, some missteps that you could have corrected or done differently. So.
Wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about publishing a book, because Jennifer, when you set out to do this, you didn't know anything about writing a book or publishing a book. Is that correct?
That is correct. And to add to that, I think actually of the 40 authors, none of us had ever written a book. We were all first-time authors, definitely grassroots effort. So yes.
And so that was kind of a learn as you go process.
Definitely learn as you go. Being in this role as a banker, I did know a publisher. So I know exactly who I wanted to work with. So I reached out to Davis Creative, and they kind of, brainstorm with me. I sat with them and I gave them this idea of what I wanted it to look like. Initially, I thought I was going to hit 25 women. And I said, no, it's not a big enough audience. I really want this to be impactful. So the number 40 just resonated. So that was where the whole 40 women empowering stories came from. And I wanted these women, I had the privilege of knowing a lot of these women. Most of these women in this story are my clients or my friends. So I've heard their stories. So when I reached out to them, I knew that they would be authentic. Their stories would be real. They'd be genuine in their deliverables. And it wouldn't be about sales pitching or anything like that. Just their life, the lessons that they've learned, and the grit that they'd already shared with me in these stories. So yeah, that was kind of a little bit of the concept.
And for all of our panelists, how did you overcome feeling vulnerable when you were deciding to put your story out there? And it kind of ties into being an entrepreneur, right? When you have a baby of an idea, you have to be vulnerable enough to be able to share it with the world. Does anyone want to comment on feeling vulnerable and getting through that, and what you did to get through that?
I'll jump in.
Oh, thanks, Shar.
So I was actually torn between 3 different stories that I wanted to share as a part of the book. But working with the writing coach, we landed on the story that I ended up sharing. It's called A New Life Intentionally. And we landed on that story because as I told it to her, she felt my passion. And she said, you know what, that's your story. So I knew immediately that I would have to overcome that vulnerability in order to share this story with the world. And it is a very personal story. Everyone's story is, it's authentic to who we are. It's a genuine, true story about my life, how I met my husband, just our lives that we built together. The transition, like I said, I made from Kansas City to St. Louis. But yeah, I'm very aware that in order to have change, you have to share your story. We learn more than anything through storytelling. So it was one of those things I just had to overcome it. And it was not a difficult decision. There was a story that I had in mind that I think would have been more difficult for me to put out to the world. It was a story I had to discuss with my husband to see if he was okay with me sharing it. But we ended up not going down that route. And I'm very, very happy sharing my story. It's a story that even when my family members read it, they were like, oh my gosh, I did not know that. So not only, is it impactful for everyone, but especially those closest to me, which are my family members. So yeah, I love being vulnerable. I understand the power that it has.
So true. Does anyone else want to comment on being vulnerable in business and in writing?
Yeah, I think for me, being vulnerable is a choice. And it's a choice that you make being completely aware that not that people are going to exploit that, but you're raw, right? And so there could be a reaction that you didn't anticipate, or that you did anticipate but weren't excited about, that really could affect you very, very personally if you allow it to. I think for me, choosing to be vulnerable was the culmination of 2 things coming together at the same time. I think one of them was age. I'm 46 years old now. I have heard women talk about this my whole life and thought I would never get there, but I finally got to the point where this is who I am. You can take it or leave it, right?
And so I think that just being myself and projecting myself was one part of it. And the other part of it was working with a business coach. We would talk a lot about like my personal values and my personal life. And he's like, none of that comes through in any of your professional positioning. You talk about what you do all the time, but you don't ever talk about yourself. And I'd grown up in kind of a workplace setting where your professional self is your professional self and your personal self, and what you do outside of work and who you are and how you express yourself outside of work is not professional to bring that into a work setting. And I think sometimes as women, that's even more the case. And so I had to really do some work on talking about myself in a professional capacity rather than talking about what I do. Because as my coach says, people connect with people, not with processes, right? So they need to believe that I am credible and trust me in order to be able to believe that I can do the job for them. So there was also that. And I think this last year, with everybody working remotely, people working from home and trying to manage schooling one or more children at the same time with a partner who's living in the same house, really blurred those lines a lot, that we couldn't hold up those facades for very long without some of that coming down. And I think that made the choice to be vulnerable and really talk about the personal effect of what happens in our lives on our professional lives and in our professional capacity palatable, and really kind of made me feel like it was okay to do that and to advocate for everybody really just being who they are in a workplace setting. You're bringing yourself to work. You're not leaving yourself at home and coming to work as a robot. So I think that made it easier to be really vulnerable about what I'd gone through and where it led in a work and life capacity.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I think at this time we're going to break into breakout rooms for more conversation and networking. So we'll be putting each of our panelists into a room, and attendees, you can choose the author you'd like to join for conversation. And we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for networking. And we will let you know when time is almost up. So to choose your breakout room, just click the breakout rooms button at the bottom, and then click on choose breakout room and select a room to join. So attendees